We build everything here from Superbird's original stuff, and then we got one section of our business up here just modifies new cars.
A ton of power.
15 to 20 race cars lie stacked atop one another in a field behind an unremarkable garage in Level Cross, North Carolina. Their metal bodies slowly yielding to weather and time, while the man who once drove many of them continues to refuse every serious offer to move them. Richard Petty has kept that decision for decades, and the quiet persistence of it reveals more about the most successful driver in NASCAR history than any trophy case or record book ever could. Before the stacked cars can mean anything, the scale of what Petty accomplished has to be understood in its full weight. Across a career that began in 1958 and ended in 1992, he recorded 200 Cup Series victories. David Pearson, the nearest rival on the all-time list, finished with 105. Petty nearly doubled that total. 7 championships, 7 Daytona 500 wins, 123 poles, 513 consecutive starts between 1971 and 1989, 1,184 total starts over 35 seasons. Those numbers have not been eroded by later generations. They stand as fixed features of the sports landscape. Petty Enterprises, founded by his father Lee in Level Cross in 1949, became the most successful family operation the series has ever known. Lee himself won 3 titles. Maurice Petty built the engines that powered the majority of the 200 wins. Cousin Dale Inman served as crew chief for most of the dominant years. For members of the same small-town North Carolina family entered the NASCAR Hall of Fame. The compound where the cars were designed, fabricated, and prepared still stands, and at its center remains a private garage whose interior has been closed to outsiders for years. Petty has spoken candidly about the early years when old race cars carried almost no residual value. In interviews he has recalled that a used stock car was simply a used stock car. Teams needed cash to build the next one, so vehicles were sold to smaller operations, stripped for parts, or left behind. He has admitted selling cars to West Coast racers for whatever price they would bring because no one imagined a battered stock car could one day command hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody thought about trying to save them, he has said. The cars that were not sold, the ones too damaged or too entangled in other obligations to move, ended up stacked behind the garage. Petty has estimated 15 to 20 of them sit in that pile, neither restored nor labeled, simply left in the North Carolina weather for decades. What those cars represent in pure racing history is difficult to calculate. What they represent in mispreservation is something Petty has acknowledged with a frankness uncommon among legends. He knows what was lost. The cars that survived inside the garage itself were kept for reasons that had nothing to do with market value and everything to do with memory. 2 of them bookend the arc of his career with particular clarity. One is a Plymouth Superbird, the aerodynamic machine Chrysler created in 1970 to answer the Dodge Daytona and to lure Petty back after a brief defection to Ford. Its pointed nose and towering rear wing were pure function, engineered to reduce drag and generate downforce at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. Petty won 18 races in Plymouth products that season, and the Superbird became permanently linked to the number 43. The example kept in Level Cross has never been restored for display. Tire debris still clings to the undercarriage. The bodywork carries the scars of racing contact that were never repaired because the car was never intended as a showpiece. A comparable Superbird with verified Petty provenance would rank among the most significant pieces of American motorsport history still in private hands. It has not been offered. The second car is older, less glamorous, and in some ways more revealing. It is a 1957 Oldsmobile that Lee Petty and his sons built by hand in the family garage. Richard made his NASCAR debut in it. Crude by modern standards and marked by the slow oxidation of steel kept for meaning rather than money, the Oldsmobile marks the moment before any of the records existed, when a 20-year-old from a quiet North Carolina town first pointed a homemade stock car at a racetrack and discovered what he was made of. The Superbird represents the peak. The Oldsmobile represents the origin. Both remain in the same building. Neither is for sale. At the rear of the main garage, beyond the cars and the tools and the accumulated equipment of decades, sits a smaller room that former employees have described in careful terms over the years. It does not appear on any public tour. Official museum materials make no reference to it. Those who know of it speak of it as a place where objects too personal for display were set aside. Boxes of fan letters from the 1960s and 1970s remain there, many still unopened. Petty kept them not because he planned to answer every one, but because discarding them felt wrong. Letters from children, from veterans, from people who found something in watching him race that connected to their own lives strongly enough to put into writing and mail to a stranger in Level Cross. He simply kept them. Items connected to Dale Earnhardt Sr. are also said to rest there. The two men were rivals across 2 decades, different in temperament and style, yet they developed a mutual respect that ran deeper than most public commentary ever captured. What Petty retained from that relationship is kept privately. Those who have seen the objects describe them not as souvenirs but as the kinds of things one holds when someone understood better than most is suddenly gone. There is also the frame of the car from Petty's 1980 wreck at Pocono, the crash in which the vehicle went airborne, barrel-rolled repeatedly, and absorbed an impact of the sort that has ended careers and lives. Petty walked away. The frame was kept exactly as it came from the wreckage, neither straightened nor cleaned. He has never offered a public explanation. Those who have stood in front of it say the reason becomes self-evident. The financial value of the collection is difficult to fix with precision because so little of it has ever reached the open market. Knowledgeable observers who have assessed portions of it have suggested the combined worth of the cars, the memorabilia, the handwritten setup notes from championship seasons, the race-worn equipment, and the personal artifacts could reach into the multi-million-dollar range depending on conditions at the time of any sale. Offers have arrived. Private collectors have approached. Institutions have expressed interest in acquiring pieces for exhibition. None of those conversations advanced. Petty has declined every serious proposal, not because he disputes the numbers, but because the numbers are beside the point. The objects were not gathered as investments. They were retained because releasing them felt like releasing something that could not be replaced. That stance becomes more striking when set against the financial pressures Petty Enterprises faced in its later years. The team that had dominated for decades struggled in the late 1990s and early 2000s as costs rose and the sport grew more corporate. Outside investment was brought in. Several restructuring attempts were tried. In 2008, the operation was rebranded as Petty's Garage and shifted entirely toward custom building and restoration. During the lean period, the contents of the private garage represented a potential financial lifeline that was never used. Collectors and auction houses understood what sat inside. Offers arrived precisely because the timing made acceptance more plausible. He turned those down as well. The garage was never treated as a balance sheet asset and was never going to become one. The Richard Petty Museum, established by his late wife Linda in 1988 and eventually returned to the Level Cross compound in 2014 after years in nearby Randleman, handles the public side of the family story. Visitors can see championship cars, trophies, uniforms, and carefully arranged equipment. The museum is thorough and serious. It is also emphatically not the private garage. The museum holds what Richard Petty chose to share. The garage holds what he chose not to. The difference between those two categories is where the real story resides. Richard Petty has been asked, in various forms over the years, why so much of his history remains private rather than offered to the fans who made the career possible. His answer has stayed consistent. Some things are not for crowds. They are for the people who were there. Kyle Petty, his son, raced for more than 2 decades and carries a name into a 3rd generation. He has spent time in the garage. He does not film it or discuss its contents in detail. Petty's grandson Thad Moffat has also been inside. The space functions for the family the way certain rooms in certain houses function. A place where the weight of shared history can be stored and occasionally revisited without explanation to outsiders. Kyle himself has spoken honestly about the complicated inheritance of the family name. He won 8 cup races across 18 years, a respectable career by almost any other measure, yet one that was measured endlessly against his father's 200. The garage meant something different to him than it did to the collectors and fans who wanted access. To them it was history. To Kyle it was home. The tools on the walls were the same tools he watched his uncle Maurice and his father use as a child. The cars were not artifact from a golden age. They were the machines he watched being built in the same building where he later learned to work on engines. Everything connected to that garage changed temperature after May 12, 2000. Adam Petty, Kyle's son and Richard's grandson, was 20 years old and already competing professionally, the 4th generation of the family in NASCAR and believed to be the first 4th-generation professional athlete in any modern American sport. During a practice session at New Hampshire Motor Speedway, the throttle stuck. The car struck the outside wall at speed. Adam died of a basilar skull fracture. Kyle has said that losing Adam restructured everything he understood about what the family legacy meant and what it was worth protecting. Richard has spoken of the loss with the careful economy of someone who chooses every word because none of them are quite enough. After 2000, the idea of opening the garage to commercial interest or broad public display simply ceased to be something he was willing to entertain. The objects inside had always been personal. After Adam, they became something closer to sacred. The garage is where the tools that belong to Lee Petty still hang on the same hooks where he left them. It is where the frame of a crashed car sits as a reminder that survival at the speeds these men drove was never guaranteed. It is where 4 generations of one family's relationship with a sport that demanded everything of them is stored in the quiet of a building in a small North Carolina town that most people drive past without knowing what lies inside. Richard Petty turned 86 in 2024.